What happens when the heart of a community, the place you go for your Sunday roast, the friendly face you've known your entire life, is built on a lie? What if the secret ingredient in that award-winning sausage, the one the whole village raves about, is something truly unspeakable? The story you are about to hear is a descent into that very nightmare, a journey into the quaint village of Oakhaven, a place that learned too late that the most terrifying monsters are the ones disguised as neighbors. This is a story that will make you question every friendly smile, every local tradition, and every piece of meat on your plate. Before we pull back the curtain on the gruesome secrets of Oakhaven, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button below. Make sure you also ring that notification bell, because you won't want to miss the chilling tales we uncover here every week. Trust me, you'll want to be part of our community as we explore the darkness that lurks just beneath the surface. Now, settle in, and let's travel to a village shaken to its core, where a gruesome crime was about to be exposed by investigators, revealing a truth more horrific than anyone could have ever imagined. The village of Oakhaven was a postcard. It was nestled in a gentle valley, cradled by ancient, wooded hills that blazed with color in the autumn and wore a thick blanket of snow in the winter. A silver-tongued river, the Oak, snaked its way through the center of the village, its banks lined with weeping willows and sturdy oak trees that gave the town its name. The houses were a charming jumble of centuries-old stone cottages with thatched roofs and newer, but still tasteful, timber-framed homes. Roses and ivy crawled up their walls, and in the summer, the air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass. Oakhaven was the kind of place people from the city dreamed about when the smog and noise became too much to bear. It was a place where everyone knew your name, your parents' names, and probably what you'd had for breakfast. It was safe. It was predictable. It was home. And at the very heart of that home, on the cobbled main square, stood Croft's Quality Meats. The butcher shop was as much a fixture of Oakhaven as the old stone church or the babbling river. It had been there for over a century, passed down from father to son, a legacy of blood and butchery that was woven into the fabric of the village's history. The current proprietor, Silas Croft, was the fourth Croft to wield the cleaver in that shop. He was a man built like a Hereford bull broad-shouldered, with a thick neck and hands that looked capable of snapping a femur in two. Yet, his demeanor was as gentle as a spring lamb. He had a booming laugh that could be heard across the square and a smile that crinkled the corners of his pale blue eyes. He knew every customer by name, remembered their children's birthdays, and always had a complimentary sausage or a soup bone for those who were struggling. Silas wasn't just the village butcher. He was a pillar of the community, a confidant, a friend. And his meat was legendary. People came from neighboring towns, driving for miles, just to buy from Croft's Quality Meats. His steaks were marbled to perfection, his pork chops were thick and juicy, and his chickens were plump and flavorful. But it was his specialty products that had earned him true fame. His sausages, seasoned with a secret blend of herbs and spices that was a closely guarded family recipe, had won regional awards. His savory meat pies were the highlight of the annual Oakhaven Village Fete. There was a unique richness to Silas's products, an earthy, almost gamey depth of flavor that no one else could replicate. When asked about his secret, Silas would just tap the side of his nose and chuckle. Good sourcing, good aging, and a little bit of Croft family magic, he'd say. The villagers would laugh, content with the mystery, as long as the supply of his delicious, incomparable meat never ran out. Detective Inspector Miles Harding hated Oakhaven. He hated the cloying scent of flowers, the incessant chirping of birds, and the way everyone smiled at him as if he were a long-lost cousin. After 20 years of navigating the concrete jungle of London, wrestling with gangs, drug lords, and the endless, grinding misery of the city, he had been put out to pasture. A minor heart attack at 48, a concerned chief superintendent, and a mandatory stress-related transfer had landed him here in what he privately referred to as Hobbiton. His job now consisted of resolving disputes over hedge heights, investigating the occasional stolen garden gnome, and trying to stay awake during parish council meetings. He was bored to the point of madness. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just as Harding was contemplating the existential dread of another day filled with paperwork. It was Sergeant Evans, a young, eager officer who still believed in things like community policing. "Sir, you might want to come down to the Miller farm, on the edge of the woods, past the old quarry." Evans' voice was unusually tight. "Let me guess," Harding sighed, rubbing his temples. "Old Man Hemlock's prize-winning pumpkin has been vandalized again." "No, sir." "Well, it's Arthur Miller's dog, Buster. He's dug something up. Dr. Miller is here. He's the one who called it in. He says we need you here. Now." The urgency in Evans' voice was a novel sensation. Harding felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in months. Curiosity. He pulled on his worn leather jacket, grabbed his keys, and drove his unremarkable sedan out of the village, following the winding road towards the Miller farm. The farm was situated at the very edge of the village, where the manicured gardens gave way to the untamed expanse of the Oakhaven woods. Arthur Miller, the village doctor, was a tall, reedy man who always looked perpetually worried. Today, his face was the color of spoiled milk. He stood by a freshly dug hole at the treeline, wringing his hands. His golden retriever, Buster, sat beside him, panting happily, oblivious to the tension he had created. "Miles," Dr. Miller said, his voice a strained whisper. "Thank God you're here." Harding nodded, his eyes fixed on the object lying on a clean white sheet next to the hole. It was a bone, long, slightly curved, and disturbingly familiar. "Arthur, what am I looking at?" Harding asked, though a cold knot was already tightening in his stomach. "I was a surgeon before I became a GP, Miles. I spent a decade pinning bones like this back together." Dr. Miller took a shaky breath. "That is a human tibia, a shin bone, and judging by the bite marks at both ends, it's been butchered." Harding knelt, his city cop instincts kicking in, overriding the pastoral boredom. He examined the bone without touching it. The doctor was right. The cuts were clean, precise. Not the work of an animal tearing at a carcass, but the work of a sharp, heavy blade. Like a cleaver. "Where did the dog find it?" Dr. Miller pointed a trembling finger towards the woods. "He ran in there, not 50 yards. There's a clearing. It looked like the earth had been recently disturbed. He started digging and came back with that." For the next few hours, the edge of Oakhaven Woods was transformed. Harding called in the county's forensics team, a small unit more accustomed to dusting for prints after a pub brawl than excavating a potential gravesite. The area was cordoned off with bright blue police tape, a stark, jarring intrusion on the natural landscape. The forensics officers, clad in white paper suits, began a meticulous grid search of the clearing. Harding watched them work, his mind racing. A human bone expertly butchered. This wasn't a simple murder, a crime of passion. This was something else, something cold and methodical. He scanned the treeline, his gaze drifting back towards the village. The woods behind the Miller farm stretched for miles, but in one direction, they sloped down towards the back of the properties on the main square. One of those properties was Croft's Quality Meats. A faint, almost imperceptible trail led from the clearing deeper into the woods, a path that could, if one knew the way, lead directly to the back of the butcher's shop. It was a thought so absurd, so monstrous, that he immediately dismissed it. This was Oakhaven. This was Silas Croft's village. The forensics team found more, a lot more. The shallow grave contained the partial remains of at least 3 different individuals. The bones were all disarticulated, and like the tibia, they all bore the same telltale marks of a butcher's tools. They found femurs, ribs, vertebrae. But one thing was conspicuously absent. There were no skulls, no hands, no feet. It was as if someone had carefully stripped the skeleton of its most identifiable parts, taking only the prime cuts. News traveled fast in a place like Oakhaven. By late afternoon, a crowd of concerned villagers had gathered at the edge of the police tape, their faces a mixture of fear and disbelief. They whispered amongst themselves, their voices carrying on the breeze. "A body? In Oakhaven? It must be a mistake." Harding needed to control the narrative. He addressed the small crowd, his voice calm and authoritative. "We have found some human remains," he announced, the words feeling alien on his tongue in this idyllic setting. "An investigation is underway. I ask that you all return to your homes and allow us to do our work. Please do not speculate. We will release more information when we have it." He spent the rest of the day interviewing the Millers, trying to establish a timeline. Buster the dog had a habit of running off into those woods. He could have dug up that bone any time in the last few days. The ground was soft from recent rain, making it impossible to tell exactly when the grave had been dug. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the valley, Harding sat in his small office, staring at the preliminary report from the forensics team. Victims unidentified, male and female. Ages vary. Cause of death unknown. Dismemberment occurred post-mortem. Tool marks consistent with a commercial-grade bandsaw and a heavy cleaver. A commercial-grade bandsaw. A heavy cleaver. The thought he had dismissed earlier returned with a vengeance, refusing to be ignored. He tried to picture Silas Croft, the jovial, backslapping butcher, in the woods, burying stripped human bones. The image wouldn't stick. It was like trying to imagine a saint committing a sin. It just didn't compute. And yet, the tools, the skill, the location. He needed to talk to Silas. But he couldn't go in with accusations. He needed to be subtle. He decided to pay a visit to the butcher shop the next morning, under the guise of a routine inquiry. The following day, Croft's Quality Meats was buzzing with its usual morning rush. The smell of fresh sawdust, raw meat, and Silas's secret spices filled the air. The butcher himself was behind the counter, a blood-stained apron tied around his thick waist, expertly trimming a rack of lamb. He greeted Harding with his customary booming laugh. "Inspector, don't tell me you're finally giving up on those dreadful supermarket sausages," Silas joked, wiping his hands on his apron. "Not today, Silas," Harding said, leaning against the counter, trying to appear casual. "I'm just making the rounds. You know, about that unpleasantness up at the Miller farm yesterday." Silas's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He paused, his cleaver hovering over the block. "Terrible business. Just terrible. Can you imagine? Here in Oakhaven." He shook his head, his expression a mask of concerned disbelief. "I know," Harding said, watching the butcher's eyes carefully. "Tell me, Silas, you spend a lot of time in the woods, don't you? Hunting." "Not so much these days," Silas replied, getting back to his work. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the cleaver filled the shop. "Too busy. But I know those woods like the back of my hand. Grew up playing in them. Did you ever see anything unusual back there?" Near the old quarry, Silas stopped again. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Between you and me, Inspector, that area has always been a bit strange. People used to say it was haunted. Campers and hikers sometimes pass through there. Not all of them are the most savory characters, if you catch my drift. Wouldn't be surprised if some trouble from the outside world finally washed up on our shore." It was the perfect deflection. Plausible. Reasonable. It painted Silas as just another concerned local, while subtly pointing the finger at unknown, transient outsiders. Harding felt a pang of doubt. Was he letting his city-bred cynicism run wild? Was he trying to create a monster where there was only a simple butcher? He thanked Silas for his time and left the shop, the smell of raw meat clinging to his clothes. As he walked across the square, he saw the villagers. They were going about their business, but the fear was still there, lurking behind their eyes. They were buying their groceries, picking up their children from school, and many of them were carrying brown paper parcels tied with string from Croft's Quality Meats. They were taking home his award-winning sausages, his savory mince, his famous meat pies. The thought made Harding's stomach churn. That night, sleep wouldn't come. He lay awake, the images from the crime scene replaying in his mind. The clean, precise cuts on the bones. The missing skulls. The commercial-grade bandsaw. He got out of bed and went to his office, pulling up old case files on his computer. He searched for missing persons reports in the county and surrounding regions for the last 20 years. The list was long and depressing. Hikers who went into the woods and never came out. Tourists who passed through and vanished. People on the fringes of society, drifters, runaways, whose absence would go unnoticed for weeks, if at all. He started cross-referencing dates, locations, anything that could link them to the Oakhaven area. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack. But as the hours ticked by and the moon traced its path across the sky, a faint pattern began to emerge. A hiker who disappeared near the Oakhaven Trail 10 years ago. A young couple whose car was found abandoned on a road 5 miles from the village 7 years back. A backpacker who was last seen hitchhiking on the very same road just last year. There were a dozen such cases, all cold, all unsolved. All within a 50-mile radius of this postcard-perfect village. Harding felt a cold dread seep into his bones. A dread far deeper than anything the London gangs had ever inspired in him. He was standing on the edge of an abyss, and the friendly, peaceful village of Oakhaven was staring back at him from the depths. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. Speculation and circumstantial evidence weren't enough. He needed proof. He needed to get inside Croft's Quality Meats. He spent the next day securing a warrant. It wasn't easy. The local judge was a friend of Silas's and thought the request was preposterous. But the forensic report, combined with Harding's list of missing persons, was just enough to sway him. The warrant was granted, but with a strict condition. It had to be executed after business hours, with minimal disruption. Harding assembled his small team, Sergeant Evans and 2 other constables. He briefed them in the quiet of the station, their faces pale in the harsh fluorescent light. "We are going to search the premises of Croft's Quality Meats," Harding said, his voice low and steady. "We are looking for evidence linking the shop to the remains found in the woods. We will be professional, we will be thorough, and we will be quiet. No one in the village is to know about this until we are finished." At 10 p.m., long after the last lights in Oakhaven had been extinguished, Harding's team moved in. The main square was deserted, bathed in the eerie yellow glow of the old-fashioned street lamps. A light mist was rolling in from the river, muffling their footsteps on the cobblestones. They approached the butcher shop from the rear, through a narrow, dark alleyway that smelled of iron and rot. Harding picked the lock on the back door, clicked open with a soft snick. They entered a small, cluttered storage room. The air was cold and thick with the smell of bleach and old blood. They moved through to the main shop, their flashlights cutting sharp beams through the darkness, dancing over stainless steel counters, hanging hooks, and blocks of wood scarred with a century of butchery. It was all clean, meticulously so. Too clean. Evans went to work on the shop's computer, searching sales records and invoices. The others began a systematic search of the main floor. Harding's attention was drawn to a heavy, walk-in freezer door at the back of the preparation area. A faint humming sound emanated from it. He pulled on a pair of latex gloves and grasped the thick metal handle. It was unlocked. He pulled the heavy door open. A wave of intensely cold air washed over him, smelling of frozen meat. He stepped inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the frigid vapor. The scene before him was a tableau from a slaughterhouse. Carcasses of pigs and lambs hung from massive hooks, their bodies frozen solid, their eyes glassy and dead. Slabs of beef and sides of bacon were stacked on metal shelves. It was exactly what one would expect to find in a butcher's freezer. Harding felt a wave of relief, followed by a surge of embarrassment. Had he been wrong? Had he let his imagination run away with him? He moved deeper into the freezer, his light scanning the back wall. And then he saw it. Behind the last row of hanging pigs, there was another shape. It was longer, leaner, and hung in a thick, opaque plastic sheath, the kind used for storing suits. It was out of place. He reached out a gloved hand and pushed a frozen pig carcass aside. The movement caused the plastic-wrapped shape to swing slightly, and for a moment, it was illuminated in the beam of his flashlight. Harding's breath hitched in his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs. He felt the blood drain from his face. It wasn't a pig. It wasn't a lamb. Though it was missing its head, hands, and feet, the shape was unmistakably, horrifyingly human. He stumbled back, his flashlight beam shaking wildly. As his light danced across the shelves, it caught something else. Stacked neatly next to the slabs of beef were several large, vacuum-sealed packages. The handwritten labels on them were simple and neat. Loin roast special. Ribs marinated. Mince prime. But it wasn't the labels that made his blood run cold. It was what was visible through the clear plastic. The texture of the meat, the color, the shape of the bones in the rib package. It was all wrong. It wasn't pork. It wasn't beef. Sergeant Evans' voice came from the doorway, tinged with panic. "Sir, I think you need to see this. I found the supplier invoices, the amount of pork and beef he's been selling. It's almost double the amount he's actually been buying in for the last 15 years. Harding didn't answer. He couldn't. He was still staring at the packages of special meat, at the swinging, headless corpse hanging from the hook. He thought of the village fete, of the neighborhood barbecues, of the children eating hot dogs, of the praise heaped upon Silas Croft for his uniquely delicious, award-winning sausages. The secret ingredient. The family magic. It wasn't magic. It was murder. And the entire village of Oakhaven had been eating it for generations. The silence in the walk-in freezer was absolute, broken only by the hum of the compressor and the frantic, ragged sound of 4 police officers trying to breathe. The discovery hung in the frigid air, a monstrous, unthinkable reality that defied the quiet cobblestones and quaint cottages of Oakhaven. For a long moment no one moved. They were frozen, not by the cold, but by the sheer, paralyzing horror of it all. The headless corpse, hanging so casually among the livestock, was a silent testament to a darkness so profound it felt like a physical entity in the room. Harding was the first to break the spell. His years in London, the ghost of 1,000 grim crime scenes, asserted itself, building a wall of cold professionalism around the screaming chaos in his mind. "Evans," he snapped, his voice a harsh crack in the stillness. "Get on the radio. Now. Code 0. I want this entire street sealed off. I want the regional major crime unit, I want their top forensics team, and I want them here yesterday. Nobody, and I mean nobody, gets in or out of this building. Go!" As Evans scrambled out, fumbling for his radio, Harding turned to the other 2 constables. They were young, barely out of their probation, and their faces were ashen, their eyes wide with a terror that would likely haunt their careers forever. "You 2 secure the front of the shop. Don't touch anything. Just stand guard. And for God's sake, don't let anyone see inside." They practically fled, grateful for a simple order in the face of such mind-bending atrocity. Left alone, Harding forced himself to take another look. He had to document, to process, to be the lead investigator. He raised his flashlight again, its beam now steady, and methodically swept it across the macabre tableau. He saw the precision of the butchery, the neat, clinical dismemberment. This wasn't the work of a frenzied killer. It was the craft of an expert, someone who had done this many, many times before. The vacuum-sealed packages on the shelves weren't just evidence of murder. They were products, prepared for sale, labeled with a chillingly mundane neatness. Mince prime. The words were a grotesque parody of normalcy. Who had this prime mince belong to? The hiker who vanished 10 years ago? The backpacker from last year? His mind reeled, connecting the dots with sickening speed. The bones in the woods were the waste, the inedible, identifiable parts. The rest was sold over the counter, served at dinner tables, praised at village festivals. Harding felt a violent urge to retch. He thought of every time he'd walked past this shop, smelling the savory aroma of cooking meat pies, seeing the villagers walking out with their brown paper parcels, smiling. Silas Croft hadn't just been a murderer. He had been a provider. He had fed his monstrous secret to the very community that had loved and trusted him. He had turned them all into unwitting cannibals. Before the sun rose, Oakhaven was a village under siege. The flashing blue lights of a dozen police vehicles painted the ancient stone cottages in strobing, frantic colors, chasing away the familiar morning mist. The major crime unit had arrived, a convoy of stern-faced detectives and white-suited forensic specialists who moved with an efficiency that was alien to the village's gentle pace. They descended upon Croft's Quality Meats, transforming the heart of the community into a major crime scene. The entire village square was cordoned off. The blue and white tape a stark declaration that the postcard image of Oakhaven had been torn to shreds forever. The first priority was Silas Croft. Harding, now grimly briefing the senior detective from the MCU, DCI Reynolds, stood on the cobblestones as a tactical team prepared to raid Croft's home, a small, tidy cottage just behind the shop. "He lives alone," Harding explained, his voice gravelly from lack of sleep. "Never married, no children. The last of his line," he used to say. The irony of that statement was a bitter pill. The raid was anticlimactic. The tactical team smashed through the door with brutal efficiency, but the cottage was empty. The bed was neatly made. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the kitchen table, a silent testament to a hasty departure. Silas Croft was gone. He had vanished into the night, slipping away before Harding's team had even opened his freezer door. An all-ports warning was issued, his face and description sent to every police force, airport, and ferry terminal in the country. But Harding knew it was a formality. A man like Silas, a man who had lived a secret life of such epic deception, wouldn't be caught so easily. He had a lifetime of practice at hiding in plain sight. As the day wore on, the full, horrifying scale of what lay within the butcher shop began to emerge. The forensics team, grim-faced and methodical, cataloged the contents of the freezer and the hidden basement they discovered beneath a trapdoor in the preparation area. The basement was a charnel house. It contained a fully equipped abattoir, but the equipment had been modified for a different kind of animal. There were restraints, a stainless steel table with drainage channels, and an array of hooks and tools that made even the most hardened officers blanch. Blood evidence, both old and new, was everywhere. DNA testing would take weeks, but they already knew what they would find. They estimated, based on the sheer volume of remains and biological material, that the number of victims could be in the dozens, stretching back decades. The news broke, and Oakhaven's nightmare was broadcast to the world. A swarm of media descended upon the village, their satellite vans and camera crews turning the once peaceful lanes into a chaotic circus. They shoved microphones in the faces of stunned villagers, their questions like salt in a gaping wound. How did it feel to live next to a monster? Did you ever suspect? Did you buy his meat? Did you eat it? The psychological impact on the village was cataclysmic. A wave of collective horror and revulsion washed over the community. People stood in their gardens, staring at their neighbors, their faces etched with a dawning, sickening understanding. The friendly chats over the garden fence, the shared meals, the community barbecues, every memory was now tainted, poisoned by the truth. Mrs. Gable, the sweet old lady who had won the village fate's meat pie competition for 3 years running using Silas's special mince, was hospitalized with a nervous breakdown. Young Timmy, who Silas always gave a free sausage to, refused to eat. The local pub, usually a hub of cheerful gossip, was silent, its patrons staring into their beers, their minds replaying every interaction, every meal, every friendly word from the man who had been their butcher. Suspicion, like a virulent plague, began to spread. How could no one have known? For so long, people started to remember things, little oddities they had dismissed at the time. The strange-smelling smoke that sometimes came from the butcher shop's chimney late at night. The way Silas was always so keen to help dispose of rubbish after village events. The hikers and tourists who would be seen in the village one day and gone the next, their disappearances noted but never seriously questioned. Everyone had assumed they had simply moved on. Harding found himself in the unenviable position of investigating not just a series of murders, but the soul of a village. He and DCI Reynolds began the grueling process of interviewing every single resident. The interviews were surreal. They were part police interrogation, part therapy session. People wept, they raged, they whispered in fear. He donated the sausages for the school fundraiser every year. The headmistress of the primary school confessed, her body racked with sobs. The children loved them. "I helped him carry a new freezer into his basement 10 years ago," said one of the local farmers, his face pale. "It was heavy. He said it was for game. Venison." He laughed about it. Amid the grief and horror, Harding began to dig deeper into the history of the Croft family. He felt that the key to understanding Silas lay in understanding his past. He spent hours in the dusty village archives, poring over old records, birth certificates, and property deeds. The Crofts had been in Oakhaven since the late 18th century. The butcher shop had been established in 1888 by Silas's great-grandfather, Alastair Croft. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Elspeth Croft, a 90-year-old woman living in a nursing home in a neighboring town, was Silas's distant cousin. Her mind was frail, but her memory of her childhood was sharp. Harding sat with her in a sun-drenched room that smelled of lavender and disinfectant. "The Crofts were always different," Elspeth whispered, her voice like rustling leaves. "My father used to tell me to stay away from that side of the family. He said they had a dark pantry." "A dark pantry? What did he mean by that?" Harding pressed gently. "He never said directly, but there were stories, whispers, about the long pig," she said, the archaic term for human flesh sending a chill down Harding's spine. Everyone thought it was just a silly, scary story to frighten children, about how the Crofts helped the village get through the lean winters, the hard times. They always seemed to have meat when no one else did. People were grateful. They didn't ask questions. She spoke of Silas's father, Abram, and his grandfather, Elias. They were pillars of the community, just like Silas, respected, admired, but there was always an edge to them, a secrecy. They kept to themselves, and the secrets of their trade were guarded more fiercely than crown jewels. The family magic Silas had joked about was, it seemed, a very real, very old, and very dark tradition. The investigation into Silas's empty cottage yielded another crucial piece of the puzzle. Tucked away in a secret compartment behind the old fireplace, detectives found a collection of leather-bound ledgers. They were not account books. They were journals, written in the spidery script of Silas's grandfather, father, and then in Silas's own neat hand. They were a meticulous, horrifying record of the family's harvests. Harding read them in the dead of night, the words on the page making his blood run cold. They detailed the victims, referred to only by codes, hiker, traveler, runaway. They noted the dates of the harvest, the quality of the meat, and chillingly, they contained recipes. Detailed, handwritten recipes for traveler's stew, special shepherd's pie, and notes on which spices best complemented the unique flavor of their product. It was a family cookbook from hell, passed down through generations. The journals confirmed that the victims were, as Harding had suspected, outsiders. People on the move with few connections whose disappearances would cause minimal fuss. The Crofts had preyed on the vulnerable, luring them from the nearby roads with offers of work, a meal, or a place to stay. They were the perfect predators, hiding behind a facade of rural charm. But it was the final entry, written in Silas's hand and dated only a week before the discovery, that truly terrified Harding. It was short and cryptic. "The herd thins, but the tradition must endure. The final feast is prepared. It is time for the apprentice to take the knife. The bloodline is not the only thing that matters. The spirit of the craft must be passed on." An apprentice. The word leaped off the page. Silas wasn't working alone. He was training a successor. The manhunt for Silas Croft was only half the battle. There was another monster in Oakhaven, someone who had learned the family trade, someone who knew the gruesome secrets of the dark pantry. And unlike Silas, this person wasn't on the run. They were still here, hiding among the grieving villagers, wearing a mask of innocence. Harding looked out the window of the temporary incident room set up in the village hall. He saw the faces of the villagers, now clustered around the media vans, their expressions a mixture of grief and morbid curiosity. The apprentice could be any one of them. It could be the young man who delivered bread to the butcher shop every morning. It could be the quiet woman who tended the church gardens. It could be the friendly pub landlord who always had a good word for Silas. The entire village was a pool of suspects. And as the manhunt for the master butcher continued in the woods and hills beyond, Harding realized a second, more insidious hunt had to begin right here, in the shattered heart of Oakhaven. He had to find the apprentice before they could finish what Silas had started, before the final feast could take place. The horror was not over. In fact, it may have only just begun. The revelation of an apprentice shifted the very ground beneath the investigation. Oakhaven was no longer just a village of victims. It was a cage, and somewhere inside, a predator was quietly watching, waiting. The fear that had gripped the community mutated into something sharper and more poisonous. Paranoia. Every sideways glance was a potential accusation. Every closed door hid a possible secret. The comforting familiarity of village life was gone, replaced by a suffocating suspicion that turned lifelong neighbors into strangers. DCI Reynolds, a man accustomed to the clear-cut brutality of city crime, was frustrated. "We're chasing a ghost and hunting a phantom," he grumbled to Harding, staring at a board covered with the faces of every adult resident of Oakhaven. "The manhunt for Croft is going nowhere. He knows those woods too well. He could survive out there for months. And this apprentice, we have nothing. No name, no description, just a cryptic line in a madman's diary." Harding, however, felt a strange sense of clarity. The city had taught him that monsters rarely worked alone. They fed on a network of silence, complicity, and shared darkness. Silas hadn't just needed an apprentice to carry on the craft. He would have needed help. Help with luring victims, help with the heavy lifting, help with maintaining the facade. The apprentice wasn't just a student. They were an accomplice. "We're looking at this the wrong way," Harding said, walking towards the board. "We're looking for someone who seems out of place, someone suspicious." But the Crofts' entire legacy was built on being the opposite. They were the heart of this community. The apprentice won't be a recluse or an outcast. They will be someone everyone knows, someone everyone likes. Harding's new investigation was one of nuance. He and his team began re-interviewing the villagers, but this time the questions were different. They weren't just asking what people saw. They were asking about relationships. Who was Silas's closest friend? Did he have any confidants? Who spent the most time at the shop, besides customers? A few names began to surface repeatedly. There was Thomas, the quiet young man who ran the village bakery and delivered fresh bread to Silas every morning. He was shy, unassuming, and had been mentored by Silas after his parents died. There was Margaret, the stern but respected head of the parish council, who had fought tooth and nail to get Crofts Meats designated as a heritage business, protecting it from outside competition. And there was Arthur Miller, the doctor who had first identified the human bone. He had been Silas's tennis partner for years, one of the few people who saw the butcher outside of his shop. Harding focused on the phrase from the journal. "The bloodline is not the only thing that matters. The spirit of the craft must be passed on." It implied a choice, a selection based on merit, not inheritance. Silas would have chosen someone who shared his worldview, his meticulous nature, his ability to wear a mask. While the search for the apprentice intensified within the village, the hunt for Silas reached a critical point. A shepherd reported seeing smoke from a remote, abandoned bothy deep within the Oakhaven woods, a place only locals would know existed. A massive police cordon was thrown around the entire woodland area, helicopters with thermal imaging cameras buzzing overhead. They were closing the net. Harding knew Silas wouldn't be taken easily. He was a hunter, a man of the earth. Cornering him would be like cornering a wounded bear. He decided to use the tightening noose as a way to flush out the apprentice. With DCI Reynolds' reluctant approval, he devised a plan. They would leak a piece of false information to the press, a specific, believable detail that only the apprentice would know was a lie. The story was planted with a trusted journalist. Police sources confirmed that among Silas Croft's journals, a detailed map was found, leading to a hidden cache of trophies from his victims, buried near the old quarry. It was a complete fabrication, but it was designed to sound authentic. The real journals mentioned no such map or trophies. If anyone in the village reacted to this news, tried to go to the quarry, or showed undue interest, they would reveal their hand. The quarry was placed under discreet, round-the-clock surveillance. For 2 days there was nothing. The village remained on edge, but no one took the bait. Harding began to fear his gambit had failed. Then, on the third night, they got a hit. A lone figure, dressed in dark clothing, was spotted moving through the woods towards the quarry. The surveillance team held their breath, waiting for the figure to emerge into the moonlight. When they did, Harding, watching from a monitor in the incident room, felt a jolt of disbelief. It was Arthur Miller, the doctor, the man who had started the entire investigation. Miller didn't search for any buried cash. Instead, he carefully placed a small, waterproof bag under a specific rock, marked with a small, almost invisible carving. He then left as stealthily as he had arrived. The police retrieved the bag. Inside was a vacuum-sealed package containing medical supplies, antibiotics, high-energy protein bars, and a short, handwritten note. "They're closing in. The old mill by the falls. Be ready. Your work is not done." It was a supply drop and a message. Miller wasn't the apprentice. He was the apprentice's accomplice. A loyalist helping the true successor. The work not being done was a chilling thought. Harding suddenly understood Miller's role. As the village doctor, he could sign death certificates, access medical records, and explain away minor injuries. He would be the perfect partner for a killer, an invaluable asset in maintaining the secret. But who was he helping? The note mentioned the old mill. It was another derelict location, even more remote than the bothy where Silas was presumed to be hiding. Was Silas there? Or was this a rendezvous point for the apprentice? Before they could act on this new intelligence, the radio crackled to life. All units. Suspect sighted. He's broken cordon, heading south towards the river gorge. He is armed. I repeat, suspect is armed. Silas had made his move. He had abandoned the bothy and was making a desperate run for it. Harding raced to the scene, joining the massive police presence converging on the steep, wooded gorge. The sound of shouting and the barking of police dogs echoed through the trees. The chase was on. Harding found DCI Reynolds coordinating the search near the edge of a cliff overlooking a powerful waterfall that cascaded into the river below. "He's trapped," Reynolds yelled over the roar of the water. "There's nowhere else for him to go." They saw him then. Silas Croft, no longer the jovial butcher, but a wild, cornered animal. His clothes were torn. His face was gaunt and smeared with dirt, but his eyes burned with a defiant fire. He stood on a precipice just above the waterfall, clutching a long, wicked-looking hunting knife. "It's over, Silas," Harding shouted, his voice amplified by a megaphone. "There's no way out. Put down the knife." Silas let out a booming laugh, a grotesque echo of the sound that had once been a comfort to the village. "Over? Inspector, you still don't understand, do you? It's not a crime. It's a service. It's a tradition. My father and his father before him, we fed this village. We culled the weak from the herd, the strays, the ones no one would miss. We turned waste into sustenance. We made Oak Haven strong." His words were a torrent of mad justification, the philosophy of a dynasty of monsters. As he spoke, Harding saw movement behind him. A figure was emerging from the shadows of the trees on the far side of the precipice. It was a smaller figure, moving with a quiet confidence. "You can't stop it," Silas bellowed, raising his knife. "The spirit of the craft has been passed on. The pantry will never be bare." At that moment, the figure behind him stepped into the light. It was Thomas, the baker's boy, the shy, quiet young man who Silas had taken under his wing. But there was nothing shy about him now. His face was cold, determined, and in his hand he held a cleaver, the blade glinting in the faint light. "The apprentice," Reynolds breathed, stunned. Harding watched, horrified, as the scene played out. This wasn't a rescue. It was a succession. "The bloodline is weak," Thomas said, his voice shockingly clear and cold over the roar of the falls. "But the craft is strong." Silas turned, a look of shocked betrayal on his face. "Thomas, what are you doing?" "You got careless, old man," Thomas sneered. "You got sentimental. You let this city cop get too close. The tradition is more important than the man. You taught me that." Before anyone could react, Thomas lunged forward. Not at the police, but at Silas. The cleaver swung in a brutal, practiced arc. Silas, caught off guard, stumbled backward, his arms flailing. He teetered on the edge of the precipice for a heart-stopping second, his eyes wide with a final, shocking realization of his student's betrayal. Then, with a cry that was swallowed by the thunder of the waterfall, he was gone, plunging into the churning water below. Thomas stood there, the cleaver dripping in his hand, his expression calm. He had just murdered his master with the very tool of their shared trade. He looked across the gorge at the assembled police, and a slow, chilling smile spread across his face. He had made no move to escape. This was his coronation. In the aftermath, the full story came together. Thomas, the orphan, had been an easy target for Silas's grooming. The butcher had become the father figure he craved, slowly indoctrinating him into the family's craft. Thomas was a keen student, more ruthless and less sentimental than his mentor. The note Miller had planted was a ruse, a double-cross planned by Thomas to lead the police to Silas, eliminating his master who he felt had become a liability. Miller, terrified of Thomas, had confessed everything. Thomas had planned one final feast in Silas's Honora feast where the main course was to be Detective Inspector Miles Harding. The village of Oakhaven could finally breathe, but the air was forever changed. The butcher shop was eventually torn down, but its shadow remained. The story became a dark legend, a cautionary tale whispered to frightened children and tourists. The idyllic postcard was gone, replaced by a crime scene photo that would never fade. Miles Harding did not return to London. He stayed in Oakhaven, the jaded city cop who had found a darkness in the countryside far deeper than any he had known in the city. He walked the quiet streets, no longer hating the peace, but understanding the terrifying fragility of it. He knew that monsters didn't always have fangs and claws. Sometimes they had a friendly smile and a butcher's apron, and they lived right next door. And sometimes, their legacy was passed on not by blood, but by a shared, unspeakable secret. Outro music begins, a somber and reflective version of the intro theme narrator. The evil that haunted Oakhaven was cut out, but the scars will remain forever. It's a chilling reminder that the most idyllic settings can hide the most depraved secrets, and the face of a monster can be as familiar as the face of a friend. The story of Silas Croft and his apprentice is a testament to the darkness that can be passed down through generations, a tradition of horror hiding in plain sight. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of Oakhaven. If this story left you with a chill, please let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and share. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. There are always more shadows to explore, and we'd be glad to have you with us. Until next time, stay vigilant and be careful who you trust.